This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Alright, now before I do anything else, let me just take a brief minute here and breathe a huge sigh of relief. It's all good. Everything made it here in one piece. The apartment is, well, better than how it looked when I arrived. The furniture pieces are temporarily where I want them to be. Although I'm not entirely sold on some of the kitchen stuff. But I'll deal with all that shite later, because I got my internet up and running. My bed is functional. I've got food in the fridge. I am as peachy as your average Joe. Men are simple creatures. Always remember that. Food, sleep, internet service. Pretty much all you need to be happy. Now for the bad news. By the time I actually got everything up and running to my liking, it was Sunday evening. And I barely had enough time to fit in the WWF content this weekend, but I know I had to prioritize that above anything else. So here's the situation for Friday. There will not be a Friday podcast this coming week, simply because I haven't had time to watch anything over the weekend, and that's my normal prep time. It was completely shot. So you're going to get a Monday show from me, and then we'll reconvene here on the channel the following week for Retro Raw. I appreciate being flexible, but I really need to catch up on sleep first and foremost. So if I can gain an extra hour or two by not staying up late, I'm going to do that. Because I'm just mentally and physically shot. But we have a lot to talk about here, so let's get going with the intros, and then we'll segue into the WWF In Your House recap. It's the Five Starr Wrestling Report. You all know the deal by now. We're the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. YouTube and Rumble, Mondays and Fridays. Make sure to subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. I appreciate everybody that comes back to support the channel. The few of you that there are. Only objective of mine is to spread some classic wrestling talk, because frankly, we don't have enough of it. And considering the state of modern wrestling, I think it's the true passionate fans that really need a bit of a palate cleanser. It's not to say retro WWF from 1996 is any better than the garbage you get today, but at least we can go back and have a good laugh at the stupidity and horrors of the mid to late 90s. Plus, you actually had real star power back in the day, and that certainly helps. I'm not entirely sure how this review is going to go. The pay-per-view was called Mind Games, and boy, it felt like a mind game watching some of this crap. Maybe it was because they were in Philly. There's a very off-putting vibe when it comes to Philadelphia. I was surprised to hear they managed to pack in 13,000 people to see this thing live. I didn't even know WWF had 13,000 fans back in 1996. This may have been the entire fan base. All 13,000 fans just so happen to be citizens of Philly. Now, I'll do the usual card rundown in a sec, but just to put a finishing bow on some of the recent Raw recaps we've been talking about, the build to this has been absolutely atrocious. Up until the go-home show, I wasn't even entirely sure what the hell else was happening on this card outside Taker versus Goldust and Michaels versus Mankind for the title. Then we saw the rest of the card play out, and I remembered why I didn't really know what else was initially booked. I guess you can throw Jose Lothario versus Jim Cornette in there, because they did at least hype that one on TV for a few weeks. And I have vivid memories of actually seeing that match in full, given that I'm a huge Jim Cornette mark. Political views aside. I mean, the opening match was a perfect example of me just sitting there going, wait, when the hell did that get booked? It's Justin Hawk Bradshaw versus Savio Vega in a Caribbean strap match. Despite that we've never actually seen these two work a regular singles match together, here they are in pay-per-view working a strap match because, well, why not? They're in Philly. Traditionally, it's a more hardcore audience. And given that they were in ECW country, I guess the WWF wanted to throw some people a bone. Let's give them some hardcore wrestling, pal. It was about as hardcore as a modern WWE street fight. Strap match with no blood and, to be honest, not a ton of heat either. The Bradshaw-Dutch Mantel pairing is still so bizarre to me. On paper, it should have worked a whole lot better in execution. But when you go back and look at them together, I mean, seriously, how often have we actually seen them on television? Much less in any meaningful programs or feuds. It's a shame, too, because both guys were extremely talented. I know a lot of people don't like Bradshaw. Whatever, I don't give a shit. He was a good worker, despite how people might perceive his attitude. But when you look at their position on the card in the WWF, hell, I'd barely consider them mid-card talent with the way they've been booked. Referring to Bradshaw and Dutch, by the way, Savio's at least somebody they pushed against some of the top names. But Bradshaw never really got to work with the main eventers to the extent that Savio did. So while the match here was fine, it just didn't mean a whole lot because the feud barely ever got out of first gear. It's also a strap match, so it had that problem going for it. I've been on record saying that I always hated the strap match gimmick in the WWF. The touching all four corners of the ring. It was always so stupid to me. Savio winning was pretty apparent. Even the finish was very standard. Like the whole thing where the heel is about to touch the fourth corner, but he doesn't realize that the babyface is also touching the corner pads behind his back. Then the idiot heel ends up pulling the babyface into the last corner and screws himself over. And it's so cut and dry, you can pretty much write it off in your sleep. As an opener, it was passable enough. But again, I really didn't care one way or the other, simply because they never devoted any TV time to actually making the feud matter. So they pretty much went directly from that into the Jim Cornette-Jose Lothario match. And this was very much as I remember it. Short, concise, and practically that's what it needed to be. It was the perfect opportunity for the announcers to crack nonstop fat jokes at Cornette. JR by far had the best ones. At one point he said, "Cornette looks like a giant Twinkie getting bounced around." He also said that Richard Simmons was Corny's favorite workout specialist. And I took that one personally. Because if we're going to be throwing shade at people who had a collection of Richard Simmons VHS tapes growing up, fuck you. That's all I have to say about it. Y'all can make fun. There's a reason I stayed fit for most of my life. God rest his soul, man. I know Richard Simmons was an oddball, but he's probably the only flamboyantly gay man I would ever consider hanging out with. At least we could find commonalities to talk about, such as the importance of health. Of course, we can't do that now because he's dead, but you get my point. So anyway, here's the match in about a 10-second recap. Cornette tried to come out and cut a heat promo, goading Lothario to stay in the back and not come out. And then Lothario came out. He threw a few decently worked punches at Cornette's face. Then he threw one final jab, knocked Corny flat on his back, and he pinned him. I think the entire match went about 45 seconds. And again, that's precisely how it should have gone. And there's no reason why Jim Cornette, the fat pussy heel manager, should have been getting legit offense on a trained pro wrestler, regardless of the fact that he was 150 years old, or whatever Cornette joked about. Now, even at 150, Lothario should have easily been able to mop the floor with Cornette in under a minute. So this was perfectly done. It would be considered a dud in the Meltzer ratings department because they didn't go out there and cut themselves open from asshole to appetite, or do a bunch of 450 splashes and backwards cartwheels. But you know, outside the main event, this is probably one of the other major highlights of the show for me, which is kind of a bad omen for what was to come on the rest of the pay-per-view. It's not even to say that the in-ring segment with Brian Pillman, Owen Hart, and Steve Austin was bad. It was just predictably exactly how I figured it would go down. I mean, I even commented ahead of time, yeah, there's no way Brett's actually making his return at In Your House. Sure enough. Now, again, we have to recall the setup for this thing. A few weeks ago on TV, I think it was actually when Pillman was doing commentary for some reason, he made a passing mention that he was going to be interviewing Brett at In Your House because he had a personal connection with Brett going back to their time in Canada together. And they were hamming it up so much on the subsequent TV shows. You knew the whole thing was a giant ruse. So, of course, Pillman comes out there and starts cutting a heat promo, talking shit about how much of a cesspool Philadelphia is, how it's the land of welfare, drug abuse, and battered women. And, well, he's not exactly off base in that assertion. There's a reason smart people stay away from major cities like Philly. Not a safe place to be. Nor is Pittsburgh, for that matter. I was down there the other week to go see Chris D'Elia do a comedy show. Dude. Don't go there. That's all I have to say. So after pooning the crowd and calling them a bunch of degenerates, he calls out Owen so they can bring some real class to the Philly area. By the way, I had to mention this. The person with the sign that read, Owen Hart, King of Farts. You pop me. That one made me chuckle. Poop and fart jokes, dog. They will never not be funny. Also funny, Owen Hart nicknaming Bryan as Pill. Not Pillman. Pill. So, well, Owen's going off on Brother Brett, saying that Brett was supposed to originally show up here in Philly to address the people, but he's too scared to confront the real threat standing before him. Not Owen, not Pillman, but none other than Stone Cold Steve Austin. For the record, Brett was never actually advertised to appear in Philly. He made that abundantly clear in his pre-tape when he called the heels a bunch of liars. So they bring down Austin, who is slowly morphing into the Stone Cold gimmick with each passing appearance. The only thing missing at this point is the glass-shattering theme music. But the look is becoming more and more raw and gritty. Comes out there with the leather vest and the blue jeans, doing the Stone Cold strut, which, I mean, if you know what that is, it's easy to visualize what it looks like. And man, I gotta say, people love to rave about that classic Austin 316 promo from the King of the Ring pay-per-view. This fucking promo that Austin cut on Brett here was just, I mean, I'd argue it was even better than the King of the Ring promo. And I'm not even being hyperbolic. It was that good. He's talking about how everybody knew that Brett wasn't going to show up in Philly because he's too scared to be in the same ring as Austin. He can't even call Brett a chicken. He's the greasy slime that comes out of the rear end of a chicken. If you put the letter S in front of Hitman, you've got Austin's exact opinion of the kind of man Brett is. Ever since Stone Cold came into the WWF, Brett's been looking for any excuse to pack his bags and move back home to Canada. And the next time you see Austin stand toe-to-toe in the ring with Brett, someone's going to get their ass kicked. And Austin 316 says it's going to be Brett getting his ass whipped. And that's the bottom line. Now, granted, I wasn't reading that all back verbatim, but that was the verbiage in summary. And of course, you listen to the fans here. They're not unanimously cheering Austin quite yet. Even in places like Philly, which are mostly hardcore people watching anyway. But you can still hear those audible cheers in pockets. And I think that's really a testament to how incredibly smooth Austin was as a talker. I mean, he was by far the best thing going in the company at this point. As big of a taker mark as I was, and still am to this day, Austin was the guy around this time. It's almost impossible for me to believe that it took Vince another year and a half to realize, holy fuck, we have our next big money attraction right in the palm of our hand. We were figuring this shit out in 1996. Vince couldn't figure it out until the summer or early fall of 97. God, what a promo. If you've never heard this specific Austin promo before, you need to go find it somewhere on YouTube. I'm not kidding you, it's easily one of the best promos of the entire year. Right up there with the Austin 316 promo from the King of the Ring show. I also liked how Pillman had to throw in, by the way, Philly sucks. Just in case he didn't make it abundantly clear earlier when he was calling the city a cesspool of filth, dreck, and welfare. It also sucks. Thanks, Brian. So up next, we had this completely random heel versus heel tag team title match, which they effectively set up on the go-home Raw to the pay-per-view. It is the Smoking Guns defending against Owen Hart and Davey Boy. And we also have new development in the Camp Cornette group. Right as Owen and Bulldog are making their way to the ring, they cut to a pre-tape in the back where Doc Hendricks is standing in the trainer's room. And Cornette's being attended to after having been laid out by Jose Lothario earlier. So like an absolute scumbag genius, fucking Clarence Mason's in there trying to get Cornette to sign paperwork. Bearing in mind that Corny's stunned, confused, and barely in a conscious state of mind to begin with. Naturally, Clarence picks that opportunity to have Cornette sign a contract that effectually turns over his manager's license for Owen and Davey. And more on that when we get to the Raw review. By the way, there was a great moment during the Guns entrance when they went to reveal Sonny's sex pose on the poster. Apparently Davey and Owen got their hands on it and defamed it earlier in the show. So you see Sonny with the big googly glasses and the dorky beard. Excellent nod to history when Mr. Perfect goes, I know it was Owen. And Vince perfectly chimes in with, Davey wasn't even there. It was Owen. If you know anything about that classic Davey promo, such a great insider rib. Alright, so there's a lot I can say about this match. Beyond it being heel versus heel, and they already made it hard enough to get the people to figure out who they were supposed to cheer for, they've also been doing this story on and off where Billy and Bart have had communication issues and trouble getting on the same page as a tag team. The big problem is that Billy's trying to keep the team on track, but Bart's too busy thinking about boinking Sonny. Now, have they bothered to be consistent with explaining this on TV? No. But that appears to be what they're doing. So Owen and Bulldog spent about 80% of the match working over Bart's knee after he was taken out with a chop block. The supposed heat part of the match that wasn't even real heat because Owen and Bulldog were getting more of a babyface response than the Guns. They're eventually able to turn the tables when Billy grabs Bulldog and starts beating him up on the floor. The Guns did some shitty double team offense, which I guess you could consider the actual heat part of the match. Again, hard to tell when you've got two heel teams going at it. So eventually they get to the spot where Bart gets shoved into Billy, but Billy wasn't paying attention, so he just assumed Bart did it on purpose. So like an absolute dick, he shoves Bart into Bulldog, who scoops him up onto his shoulder, hits him with a running power slam, and then as Billy tries to run in to make the save for his partner, who he literally just shoved seconds prior, Owen cuts him off with a spin kick to stop him, and then Davey pins Bart after hitting the power slam. So we have new tag team champions because one of the idiot Guns thought his partner tried to cheap shot him for no reason. I don't know what the hell's going on here. At least the fucking belts are on a decent tag team finally. Not to say that Owen and Bulldog were the second coming of the Midnight Express, but they were certainly an upgrade from the Smoking Guns. And if that wasn't bad enough for the poor saps, having the Guns lose the belts here on pay-per-view because of a bad miscommunication, they also got dumped by Sunny. She said she gave them her time, her money, her everything, which was met with a great line from JR as he goes, "I beg your pardon?" It's a real loose woman. She's giving away sexual promises to Bart fucking Gunn of all people. I would say that I'm sympathetic to their situation, but because it's the Smoking Guns, I don't care. From there we had Mankind, Paul Bearer, and Kevin Kelly in the bowels of the building, talking about The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. And I use the phrase bowels of the building because, boy, was that one of Vince's favorite terms in the 90s. Get ready to hear that phrase multiple times over the next several years. You are going to be hearing it a lot. I didn't write down much of the dialogue here. Paul talked about his betrayal of The Undertaker. Mankind promised that he'd leave tonight as the WWF champion. Then he told us to have a nice day. So that brought us to Mark Henry versus Jerry Lawler. The match and feud approximately 8 months in the making. That is how long this has been going on. Dating all the way back to March of this year when Henry had his first confrontation with Lawler in the ring. But now that the Summer Olympics are over, it's time to see what the world's strongest man is capable of. And the answer here in 1996, not a whole lot. But if anyone was capable of smoking and mirroring a match for a green rookie with little to no experience, couldn't go wrong with the King. And yes, it had all the usual theatrics you'd expect with Lawler coming out and trying to admonish the Philly crowd. But they really gave Henry the superstar treatment here. I can't believe how huge Mark was at this point. They billed him at something like 410. I mean, he was massive. Didn't know shit from apple butter about what he was doing in the ring. But the thing I always admired about Mark Henry was that he came in with open ears and was willing to put in the work. Never had a bad attitude. And you know, considering his lack of experience, he and Lawler had probably the best possible match they could have. Lawler called the entire thing. Henry was following instruction and getting himself over to the best of his ability. But let's be honest, it was all Lawler here. He bumped his ass off and sold perfectly for him. There was a bump he took that I legitimately thought he broke his neck on. He goes to charge Henry, but Henry does the thing where he sidesteps and Lawler takes the big bump out to the floor. Dude, he went out head first. I thought he landed right on his fucking neck. And they showed a replay. It was very close. There was not a lot of margin for error there. But they did the thing where Lawler reaches into his singlet to pull out a fake gimmick, throws a few punches at Henry, and I mean, that was pretty much the only selling Henry did. Then he grabbed Lawler and made a short comeback, got him to submit with the over-the-shoulder backbreaker, and yeah, that was it. A successful pay-per-view debut. And that's the other thing they were rolling the dice on here, and it wound up paying off for him. It's not like Henry was out there in a dark match in front of 500 people. No, this is live pay-per-view. They could not tape this. So had this gone awry, could have been a real dour note on Henry's career. And yeah, I understand they idiot-proofed it as much as possible. It went somewhere in the ballpark of 6 minutes. It was by no means a masterpiece of a wrestling match, but it got over what it needed to. You know, it's always a shame looking back at the early stages of Mark Henry's career and seeing how much of a rocky start he got off to. Whether it was injuries, being taken off TV and sent back to developmental. I mean, it took Mark a long time to get settled into a main roster position. How long was he actually around during the peak years of the Attitude Era? Because I know it wasn't that long. I'm trying to think of what happens with Mark shortly after this pay-per-view. Didn't he get hurt not too long after this? I remember he was gone for a long time before he ended up coming back as a member of the Nation of Domination. And even that didn't last all that long from what I remember. I mean, you watch something like this, you'd have thought Henry was being groomed for a major world title run at some point in the next year or two. Unfortunately, it took him almost another 2 decades before he ever sniffed world title contention again. Thank God we were sniffing the tail end of this interminable Undertaker-Goldust rivalry. It's time to talk about the final curtain match. The last time we'll see Taker versus Goldust. At least until the next time we see them wrestle. I did like the little promotional package they put together beforehand. Even though it was a giant infomercial to plug the Buried Alive match in October between Taker and Mankind. Again, just completely overlooking everything about this blow-off with Goldust. Hey, at least we know that Goldust has finally gotten over his necrophilia fetish. Now he's just out for blood. Now, I really didn't know too much about the structure of the match. In no way would I consider this the best match they've ever had together. I still think the casket match from the In Your House in July was way better. But for two bigger guys, I mean, Taker and Goldust had some really solid chemistry together. The big heat spot here was when Marlena went to give Goldust the bag of, well, the announcers claimed it was gold dust. In reality, it was a small little pouch with gold glitter inside. But Goldust threw that in Taker's eyes to blind him. Tim White was apparently oblivious to the giant pile of gold glitter in the ring. So Goldust worked over Taker for a while. They get to the spot where Taker goozles Goldust and gives him a choke slam off the top rope. Then he hit Goldust with a tombstone and got the pin. Pretty simple. Not really shocking to see Taker come out on the better end of the feud. It did spoil the finish 6 ways from Sunday, but that's not really an issue. Like I said before, Taker versus Goldust was one of those feuds for me that I remember bits and pieces of things they did together throughout '96. I had completely blanked on just how many times they ended up wrestling. And again, all of it overlaps so much with the Taker Mankind program. It's probably why I don't recall later stages of the feud. It was funny seeing all the pieces of glitter stuck to Taker's body here. But this does put things to closure with Goldust, and now it's onward and forward to the Buried Alive showdown with Taker and Mankind in October. But before we get there, we have to talk about the main event of this In Your House pay-per-view. Shawn Michaels versus Mankind for the WWF Championship. What many would consider one of Shawn's more notable and better title defenses during his disastrous run as champion. And I guess it is a benefit of working with someone with such an unorthodox ring style as Mick Foley. His matches were so unique and so different during this period of the WWF. I mean, it gave Michaels an opportunity to work a completely different style that we really hadn't seen up to this point. He's worked with bigger guys, Nash, Vader, etc. But Mankind wasn't a traditional slow-moving big guy. He was just unconventional and unpredictable in a good way. Shawn wasn't really working as the babyface in peril like we've seen in a lot of his previous title defenses. I mean, the story they were trying to get over here was that Shawn was having a hard time figuring out how to respond to Foley's offense. So he was a lot more aggressive than what we were accustomed to seeing. I will get my one major gripe out of the way, and it's kind of a big one. The minute they wheeled the casket out to ringside during Mankind's entrance, you immediately knew what was going to happen at the finish. It was beyond predictable. It was blatantly telegraphed. I mean, it was just a giant distraction because you're sitting there waiting for the big angle to play out at the end, where they open the lid and you know who rises from the ashes. And for the people that say, well, you didn't have to notice it, it was right in front of the hard cam. You would have had to been blind not to see it. But just going over some of my notes I took here. They had Michaels work over Mankind's knee after he gave him a snap suplex into the ring steps at one point. That was a staple of a lot of Foley's earlier matches. The knee bumps into the ring steps, or it looks like he damn near tears his ACL every time you see it. Ironically, that wasn't even in the top 10 of the most ludicrous bumps Foley would take in the next 2 or 3 years. So he and Michaels are going back and forth. The longer it went, the sweatier both guys were getting. So you could visibly see more and more of the gold glitter from the previous match on their bodies. Vince at one point blatantly spoiling the ending when he asked, "Will we see The Undertaker make another appearance before the end of the night?" Gee, you think? Wonder what that giant-ass fucking casket is doing out there. This part of the match made me laugh. So they're on the floor brawling by the announcers. And I don't even know what Hebner was doing. Probably bickering with Paul Bearer about something. But he's distracted long enough so Shawn can grab a chair and give Foley several shots to the back and the head with it. And so after he's concussed Foley with his chair, Shawn decides to throw him back into the ring so he can then work over his hand to prevent him from using the mandible claw. Because that's logical. I've splattered this man's brain matter all over God's creation. I will now put him back in the ring and begin biting his hand. Excellent. So they keep going for a while longer. Mankind eventually turns the tables and starts hitting Shawn with all his signature offense. Double arm DDT, the pile driver. But Shawn won't stay down for a 3 count. So he gets frustrated and goes out to the floor to grab a couple chairs, which then leads to, well, nothing, in fact. He throws the chairs into the ring so he can then go to try to toss Shawn into the casket. Shawn ends up fighting back and getting Mankind set up for the big elbow drop. And as Mankind goes to crotch Shawn in the top, they end up taking the big pratfall through the Spanish announce table. The Mankind easily got the worst landing. Shawn basically just fell right on top of him as they were coming down. And so, well, we eventually get this awesome spot where Foley grabs one of the chairs and tries to go up top with it. But then Shawn uses the other folding chair to do a springboard sweet chin music and then kick the other chair into Foley's head. That was really innovative. Great spot. And then right as Shawn's going for the pin, Vader hits the ring for the disqualification. This is where my notes kind of got jumbled because there was a lot of shit to keep track of in the closing 5 or so minutes. In some order, here's the series of events that took place. Paul Bearer hit Shawn in the back of the head with the urn. Sid Vicious came down to fight off with Vader. Mankind put the claw hold on Shawn. And then as he goes to dump Shawn's unconscious body into the casket, surprise, bitch. Taker pops out of the casket and spooks the shit out of Paul, which is a great camera shot. Unsurprisingly, the people erupted when Taker popped out of the coffin. It's the same joke about how anybody that comes out of a box gets over. Same deal with the casket, dude. People will always pop for somebody appearing from a casket. And so, Taker chased off Mankind and Paul as Shawn got to pose in the ring for several more minutes. And when I say several minutes, I'm talking at least a good solid 5 or 6 minutes of remaining pay-per-view feed. They had a lot of dead air time to kill. But all in all, definitely a great, fantastic main event close to the pay-per-view. One of my favorite matches to go back and watch from the year 1996. I mean, Lord knows there weren't that many of them. You also know how critical I've been of Shawn Michaels throughout the year. But he earned this one. Even at this point, though, it's weird because you can still see the idea being planted that they wanted to continue the Vader-Shawn feud. But of course, we all know that Shawn ends up going on to work the program with Sid going into Survivor Series. Maybe they were still toying and wanting to do Shawn and Vader for a second time before Shawn got sideways and told the company no. But I don't want to belabor that conversation again. You know, despite how bleak things were with the product around this time, you would occasionally get a WWF show or two throughout 96 with some decent to great moments. And this pay-per-view certainly had its share of those great moments. From cover to cover, I can't really sit here and objectively say it's a pay-per-view that you need to watch in its entirety. Definitely need to check out the main event for sure. It's a lot like WCW in '89. The product overall wasn't all that great for the majority of the year, but occasionally you would get those pay-per-view moments or those TV moments where you thought, hey, maybe these people aren't completely clueless. Bash 89 being a perfect example of that. But then you turn around and watch the weekly syndicated program and you're like, nope, it's still WCW. Which is kind of a good lead into this week's Retro Raw. The fallout to the pay-per-view. You know what was a really, really bad idea? Trying to watch Retro Raw on Friday night after I had spent the entire day going through moving boxes and trying to get my new place in order. I just figured, hey, you know, I've got to do this shit eventually. If I keep prolonging it, it's only going to make things worse. I'm just going to watch the thing on Friday night in the hotel. Since I still at the time didn't have functioning internet, so I couldn't set up the Wi-Fi at my new place. Well, here was the problem. I was tired. I was cranky. I was really not in any kind of mental headspace to be dealing with a bunch of bull crap. Plus, it was late when I actually finally sat down to watch the thing. But because I'm smart, that's the time I decided, yeah, it'd be a good time to try to watch the Raw after the pay-per-view. Poor choices were made. I also liked how quickly they just glossed over the entire pay-per-view from the previous night. They were so over that thing, they were already promoting the October Buried Alive In Your House pay-per-view. What great promotion, by the way. Let's just stick a giant fake tombstone in the aisleway, completely blocking everybody's path to get to the ring. And we'll slap a picture of Mankind and Undertaker on it. The art of foreshadowing. So last week they were making a big deal about the finals of the Intercontinental title tournament. They announced that Pat Patterson was going to be the guest referee. They had Mr. Perfect out here as an awkward fourth wheel commentator. Credit to him. They were really trying to make this thing come off like a big deal on television. Can't say I was all that enthused at the idea of having to watch Marc Mero versus Farouk in the finals of this thing. But hey, beggars can't be choosers. Part of me is wondering if the only reason they did Farouk and Mero in the finals was to have an excuse to have Sonny and Sable out there interacting together. I don't know what the people were expecting. A cat fight? Yeah, sure. If one of those cats is a 20-year-old paraplegic with bad thyroids. We'll talk about the quote-unquote cat fight that broke out between the girls at the end of the match. Spoiler. It was not as fun as you might imagine. But of course, you had to figure that the girls were going to be at the center of everybody's attention. So naturally, Patterson ejected Sonny right before the commercial break spot, which the people were not happy about. And while we're berating Pat Patterson, we need to talk about his officiating in this match. Y'all remember how I used to get on Bronco Lubitsch's case for his slow counts in World Class? Dude, you ain't seen nothing till you see Pat Patterson's attempts at counting pinfalls. There was a fall he went to count for Farouk at one point. He was so slow, I legitimately thought he was ribbing him. Even Kevin Kelly had to point out how glacial the pinfall count was. I'm not even shitting you. It was about this speed. 1. 2. Kick out. Could have driven a fucking semi-truck through the space there. In terms of the work between the talent, it had all the usual things you'd come to expect with Marc Mero being involved. Questions like, what the fuck was he trying to do there? A couple awkward miscues, but I mean, generally the match wasn't horrible. I did like how Sonny just nonchalantly meandered back down to ringside at the end and nobody bothered to come out to try to stop her. Even after Patterson had literally just given her the boot not less than 10 minutes prior, even he didn't give a shit by that point. But here was that little exchange between the girls I referenced earlier. Sonny gets on the apron. Sable attempts to sweep her leg out from under her. In other words, she lightly brushed her leg with her hand. And Sonny had to sell it like she got tripped. Then they had a terrible slap fight, which I laughed at. And then, well, that was it. That was the entire fight sequence between the girls. And then Mero hit Farouk with Sonny's purse and hit a 450 splash for the win. Or not a 450, what's the reverse backflip move? The shooting star press. Jesus Christ, I'm getting old. I can't even remember shit like that anymore. No, I have to admit, the post-match interview with Mero afterwards was hilarious. It's hilarious because it was so profoundly absurd and cheeky. And because I sort of remember what happens between Mero and Mr. Perfect in the coming weeks, the whole thing is that much funnier. Simply because it exposed Mero for being such a complete dork in kayfabe. He's out there trying to do this ridiculously campy white meat babyface promo. He's thanking his Lord and Savior, his partner and better half Sable. Yeah, that one aged like curdling milk. He wants to thank his loyal fans. Oh, right, he didn't really have any of those. Oops. But he finally gets around to thanking Mr. Perfect for his advice. Because the storyline they're doing is that Mr. Perfect was seen talking with Mero to feed him some pointers and basically talk strategy with him so he could win the belt. Why this was a thing, I don't know. They never explained it. Presumably we're supposed to think that the purse angle wasn't a part of that shady advice. Well, not even so much the purse, but the win at all costs mentality. Because, you know, Mr. Perfect is a heel. Now, in theory, you would think that this would be teasing a Marc Mero heel turn. To be honest with you, I don't think that ever happened. I know at some point he does go heel, but I thought that was after they repackaged him to make him Marvelous Marc Mero. Well, anyway, the point is, the whole thing was so farcical. But I'll tell you, dude, they were really rolling out the red carpet for Mero on this show. They even gave him one of those locker room post-celebration segments with all the geeks and jobbers. The funny thing is, if you held a gun to my head and asked me who he ends up dropping that strap to, I wouldn't have the first fucking clue. I do not remember a single thing about Marc Mero's Intercontinental title run. Other than the fact that it probably sucked. Like most title reigns during this time in the WWF. Moving on, though. We got to talk about this Double J story they're ramping up. Yes, Double J. Jeff Jarrett. He's back in the conversation pool. And you might be asking, what storyline could we be referring to? Well, in order to do that, we have to jump back in the time machine 1 year ago and kind of dig up some old news, because it's one of the biggest unsettled cliffhangers in WWF history. The real backstory behind Jeff Jarrett's music video of My Baby Tonight. It took them approximately 14 months to come to the conclusion, but they were finally able to put the pieces together. Turns out, the guy was fucking lip syncing the whole time. Who'd have guessed? It was July of 1995. In Your House 2, to be specific. The night Jeff Jarrett was supposed to retain the Intercontinental Championship against Shawn Michaels, while also getting to perform his newest #1 single with a live performance. And unfortunately, all things didn't turn out as planned. Now, in storyline, it was actually the roadie who fucked Jarrett out of the belt when he went to blindly trip up Michaels in the ropes. Turns out it was actually Jarrett who he tripped up. And this was supposed to lead to a feud between the two after the fact. But as you might recall, going back to some of our previous conversations last year, right as they were about to do the official split between Road Dogg and Jarrett, they actually both wound up leaving the WWF to go work for the USWA in Memphis. So we never really got a payoff to that feud. So they put the thing on ice for well over a year to then reintroduce the storyline here in September of '96, wherein we still never got a feud between them because Jarrett wound up going to sign with WCW the following month. And to be honest with you, I still don't entirely understand what went down in those meetings. Presumably, I think the rumor was that Jarrett was supposed to re-sign with the WWF in the fall of '96. But remember, he also had that contract dispute earlier in the year, which is why he made his return at the tail end of '95, but then he disappeared within a month or two into '96. I think the original plans were to have Jarrett return as a heel to feud with the newly turned babyface Rhodey. Basically what was supposed to happen last year before things fell through. And unfortunately, what we got instead was Jesse returning as an underneath guy and not really doing much of anything in a singles role until they put him and Billy Gunn together to form the New Age Outlaws. And the rest there is history, as we all know. So in a way, I guess we can kind of thank Jarrett for deciding not to re-sign with the WWF until he came back in '97. Because who knows if Vince would have ever gotten the idea to put Jesse and Billy together had things gone as they initially intended. But there is more to come with the exposure of Double J's bad lip syncing. Next week, we're going to find out who actually sung Jarrett's #1 hit. Who was the voice behind the original music video? Don't all guess at once. So from there, we had Owen Hart and Davey Boy taking on the Body Donnas. And before I talk about anything else, I have to mention what may be the greatest Jim Ross quote I've ever heard. So Clarence Mason, as we know, is now managing Owen and Davey. As we saw the previous night at the pay-per-view, after Cornette had been laid out in the bed in the trainer's room, he was not in the best state of mind, having gone through that match with Jose Lothario and having his clock cleaned. So Clarence basically got Cornette to sign a contract under false pretenses, turning over Cornette's manager's license for Davey and Owen to Clarence. And I absolutely love this quote from JR when he goes back and forth with Clarence at the commentary desk. "Did you, sir, attempt to perpetuate a fraud?" God, his delivery was impeccable. I had to listen to that one several times back. It was so great. So they're out there having the match for a few minutes, and right before they abruptly cut the feed to go to break, there was a hijacking of sorts with somebody hitting ringside with a sign that read, "Sabu fears Taz." And he got up right in front of the hard cam for approximately 2 seconds before they got chased off by security. Okay, now I'm blanking on my history all of a sudden. Was that legit? Or was that part of some storyline? I remember the ECW invasion on that episode of Raw, but I mean, that wasn't until sometime in '97, right? Because that's when the WWF was running a show from the Manhattan Center. This wasn't that, because they were in Hershey, PA for this week's Raw taping. So what the hell was that angle with the guy running in with the sign? Was that just a random cameo, or did someone actually hop the guardrail with a sign to try to stir shit up? I mean, we all know how big the fans were around this time with trying to get their signs on TV. That was a huge thing in the 90s. It had to have been storyline. But I just don't remember anything like that happening in 96. Fuck, what do I know? My historical knowledge of WWF around this time is already dicey to begin with. So they come back with Owen and Davey working over the bodies. At some point during the exchange, they went to a split screen where Cornette was vowing to get even with Clarence for what he did at the pay-per-view. I think he said next week it's him and Vader versus Shawn Michaels and Jose Lothario in a tag match. Then he would do something to get back at Clarence for stealing his tag team. I don't know, there were like 40 different conversations happening here. It was impossible to give a shit about anything happening in the match. There was a cold comeback from the bodies, and somehow Owen made somebody tap out with a sharpshooter. It's a shame we've gotten to a point now where I'm overlooking a match involving Owen Hart, but I mean, seriously, who could possibly give a fuck? On the topic of who could possibly give a fuck, they did Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus the Stalker. While that was going on in the background, I was stalking my way toward the bathroom to drop a doozy. Approximately 8 minutes and change after the bell rang to start the match, after Mr. Perfect had once again come out to steal Hunter's valet from ringside, Stalker grabbed Hunter and gave him a superplex off the top for the pin. Might be the only recorded victory for Barry Windham as the Stalker in the WWF. Actually, that's not true. I think he already wrestled a TV squash a couple weeks ago. At least in terms of wrestling somebody with name value. I know I keep saying it, but this whole storyline with Mr. Perfect and Triple H is so goddamn stupid. It's stupid because it's nonsensical. But on top of that, because I know that it never goes anywhere, the whole thing is a complete waste of time and effort. Not as big of a waste of time and effort as the fake Razor, fake Diesel stuff. Before I talk about what happened here, I think it's important to note this segment that I'm about to review, it was the TV main event. This was how they closed the program this week. All throughout the show, they were showing the locker room door with Razor and Diesel's nameplates on it. Are they going to show up live on Raw? Is JR going to interview them? Blah, blah, blah. And I didn't even talk about this angle at the pay-per-view, but there was like a 5-second pre-tape where they were seen in the bag jumping Savio. And the fact that they were so clear not to show their faces on camera. Did it really take a rocket scientist to figure out what the hell was going on here? By the way, did I mention this is the TV main event? Yeah, Raw sucked around this time, everybody. Just letting you know the obvious. There's a little thing in wrestling called Death TV, or the Death TV segment. It's a popular term that the marks like to use nowadays to describe something that's so bad and so energy draining. You're just watching everything die on the vine as it happens in real time. That's pretty much how I would describe what happened here. And before I get to the Razor stuff, I have to talk about this fucking Vinny Rue work of art. His little magic pot of work shoot horseshit he was trying to fit into the program around this time. So Jim Ross is in the ring waiting to bring out Razor, but he's got some crap that he needs to get off his chest first. So he starts going off on how he left a great job in Atlanta before coming to work for the WWF in 1993. Talking about how on his first day on the job, WrestleMania 9, company was already wanting him to dress in a toga and follow the sports entertainment business model. Then he starts going off on how he carried the entire broadcast at the King of the Ring pay-per-view in June. And the reason he's not the sole play-by-play commentator is because Vince McMahon couldn't handle suitable competition. Couldn't handle the fact that JR is the best commentator, not just in the WWF, but the entire world, period. And of course, having listened to my fair share of Vince Russo work shoot promos in my lifetime, all I can hear is the sound of that prick's voice raining through this entire fucking banter. You get the commentator sitting at ringside somberly going, "Oh, why is he doing this? What is he doing?" And look, I'm not about to do a 15-minute rant about the stupidity of the work shoot concept. I already get pissed off enough when I have to hear people mention the word shoot in wrestling, because 95% of these idiots on the internet don't even know what the hell that is. Here's my issue with how this whole thing turned out. It wasn't even the fact that JR's airing all this dirty laundry about how he got fired shortly after his first Bell's palsy incident in 94, how Vince treated him like crap and fucked him around as a result. It's the fact that he's saying all of this to a relatively unsmartened crowd who weren't really following dirt sheets or wrestling news sites at the time, by and large. I guarantee most of these people didn't have a fucking clue what JR was talking about. So what happens as a result? They're just sitting on their hands, not knowing how to react to anything. And for the handful of people that did know what JR was talking about here, his whole backstory, all it did was get him cheered. Even though that was the polar opposite of what the promo was supposed to accomplish. So congrats, Russo. You finally got to live your wet dream as being part of a booking committee. Exposing the business and blurring the lines of reality in such a way where it left people confused and dazed. Hope you're fucking satisfied. So finally, with about 1 minute left of airtime, that's when he brings out the fake Razor to absolutely zero reaction. I'm sure most people are at least somewhat aware of who the fake Razor was, so I won't bore you with all the details. It was Rick Bogner, in case you didn't know. He did a lousy entrance trying to imitate Scott Hall to the best of his ability. Got in the ring, did a catchphrase or two. And then with about 5 seconds left before they had to cut the feed, you see Savio hit the ring and get into a short brawl with them. And I know I mentioned fake Diesel earlier, but I completely overlooked the fact that Glenn never actually made an appearance here. They just showed Bogner's debut. And honestly, in good faith, I can't even entirely fault Bogner for what happened here. He just got saddled with a rotten gimmick, and there was nothing he could do about it. I personally don't remember much about him aside from the fact that his matches in the WWF were never anything to write home about, from what I recall. Apparently, he was a little bit of a whack job in real life. Tends to happen with a lot of guys that get into wrestling. He actually died several years ago, didn't he? I thought I read somewhere that the fake Razor passed away at some point in the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe it's for the better. Hopefully the stench of the storyline won't rub off on his grave. People consider this an all-time terrible segment. I mean, I was already over the goddamn thing midway through JR's heel promo. The fake Razor appearance was just the icing on the cake. But yeah, it sucked. It was terrible. Nobody in the room liked it. I mean, everybody could see how blatant Vince McMahon was with being petty when it came to the ownership of the Razor Diesel gimmicks. Keep in mind, too, bringing us back to a conversation from the other week, the whole reason for them having Jim Ross go out there to bury the company on TV like that, the whole reason behind this work shoot dealia Bob, all to set up a pointless Jim Ross heel turn. A heel turn that lasts all of like 2 or 3 months before they just flip him back babyface again. More wasted time. The show sucked. I've got no other closing statements to add beyond that. And I'm already running long here, so I want to get this crap edited and prepped for upload on Monday, and I got to get out of here too. It's church time. Singing time. Still got that baritone voice. So, again, just to recap what I talked about at the top of the program, there will not be a Friday show this week, so do not look for that in your YouTube recommends or however you get notified about videos going up on this channel. We'll be back next Monday for a Raw recap. Hopefully by that point I'll have all my crap sorted out so we can kind of resume a regular format here with the channel. And I got to figure out a situation here because this, well, you're going to be able to hear it in the recording, but the room that I'm actually in right now, the air conditioning unit's right behind me and it's just loud as fuck. I'm kind of annoyed about the idea of having to talk over that thing, so I think I might just button down and buy that microphone I've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years. We'll see. I've already spent a lot of money in the last month trying to give myself a little bit of a break here, but that's all for later on. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon. Take care and peace out.